TIFU by crashing my company's Zoom meeting while shirtless and covered in peanut butter. So this happened last Thursday, and I still can't look my manager in the eye. For context, I, 27M, work as a remote data analyst for a mid-sized marketing firm. I live alone, I rarely go outside, and my life has gradually devolved into what can only be described as a hermit who likes weird snacks lifestyle. Thursday morning, I woke up in a weird mood. I'd had this recurring dream all week where I'm in a jungle being hunted by a giant squirrel. So naturally, I woke up craving peanut butter. Not the on-toast kind of craving, but a weird let me just spoon this stuff into my mouth straight from the jar craving. I hadn't showered. I hadn't brushed my teeth. I was just a goblin in boxers slathering peanut butter onto a tortilla with my fingers like it was some kind of demented taco. At some point I dropped the tortilla, peanut butter side down, onto my stomach. I tried to grab it mid-fall, missed, and somehow smeared a glob across my chest. I laughed, because at this point I looked like a toddler who lost a fight with a sandwich. One thing led to another, and I decided, for reasons still unknown to me, that I was going to commit to the bit. So I slathered peanut butter on my torso. Not a light layer either. Full coverage. Neck to navel. It was some kind of primal regression and I was riding the wave. I turned on some jungle music, pretending to be a peanut butter tribal warrior dancing around my studio apartment. It was stupid and cathartic. Here's the thing, I was scheduled to attend a weekly Zoom sync at 10 a.m. But I had mentally logged it as optional because it's usually just a dry rundown of KPIs and nobody ever notices when I'm quiet. So I planned to skip it and shower after my peanut butter meltdown. Except this time was different. At 9:57, as I was mid-dance, my phone buzzed. It was a Slack message from my manager, "Hey, need you to give a quick update on the metrics today. Just 2 minutes tops." Panic. I bolted to my laptop, completely forgetting I was shirtless and greased like an oily snack. I frantically opened Zoom and joined the call. But in my rush, I forgot two crucial things. 1, I had left my camera on from the last meeting. 2, my display name was Peanut Daddy because my friend had dared me to change it last week and I never changed it back. So the moment I joined, 17 coworkers and my manager were greeted by a glistening, shirtless man, gleaming in the morning sunlight, chest covered in creamy skippy, panting from exertion, with the name Peanut Daddy displayed proudly below my face. Dead silence. I froze. They froze. It felt like time paused. I reached for the camera off button, missed, clicked share screen by accident, and suddenly my desktop, featuring a paused YouTube video titled "Chimpanzee Screams for 10 Hours, was plastered across everyone's screen. I finally managed to kill the camera, then the screen share. My mic was still on. In the chaos, I muttered "Jesus, the peanut gods are angry today" to myself, forgetting that I was still audible. My manager, bless her soul, said nothing for a solid 10 seconds before going, "Thanks for joining, Peanut Daddy. Can we get your update?" At that point, I knew there was no salvaging dignity. I leaned in, accepted the shame, and gave the cleanest, most professional update I've ever delivered. Still shirtless. Still smeared in peanut butter. I even threw in a "that's all from me, thanks team," before logging off with the confidence of a man who knows he's hitting rock bottom at Mach speed. After the call, I sat in the bathroom, shower running, contemplating the choices that brought me here. Why peanut butter? Why now? Why Peanut Daddy? Later that day, HR emailed me. Not disciplinary, thankfully. Just a gentle reminder to check your video settings before joining meetings and to please refrain from using inappropriate display names. I replied with a formal thank you and changed my name back to David L., like a scolded child returning home after detention. On Friday, my manager started the meeting by asking everyone to keep cameras off due to bandwidth issues. I know that was for me. I'm the bandwidth issue. But the real kicker came Monday morning. Someone in our team chat dropped a meme, photoshopped peanut butter jar with my face on it, labeled 100% organic metrics daddy. It exploded. Reactions, GIFs, hashtags. Hashtag peanut daddy is now a thing. The team made it our unofficial Slack emoji. I am immortalized. I've leaned into it now. I have no choice. My work mug says powered by peanut. But inside, I die a little every time someone says, "Hey peanut daddy, got a sec?" So yeah, // get up. Deeply. Profoundly. Permanently. But at least I'm memorable. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. It helps the content grow and motivates me to create even more great videos. Turn on notifications so you don't miss any new uploads. By the way, I'm curious, when do you usually watch my videos? While working, studying, or just relaxing at home? Let me know in the comments, I'd love to hear from you. Thank you for your support. TIFU by lying about being fluent in French to impress a girl, and ending up translating at an international business dinner. This all started a few months ago when I met Camille. She's this brilliant, artsy, funny, stunning girl who had just moved into my apartment building from Montreal. We started talking in the mailroom, of all places, and I learned she was bilingual, English and French. I, in my infinite wisdom, decided this was the moment to lie. "Oh, I speak French too," I said with a confidence I definitely did not possess. Not fluent or anything, but conversational. That was the lie that birthed the chaos. Camille was visibly delighted. She smiled and immediately switched into French, something like, "C'est super. On peut pratiquer ensemble alors." I panicked. My Duolingo-level brain kicked in and I responded with, oui, très bien, like I was auditioning to be a baguette. She laughed. Thankfully, she took it as modesty or shyness. From there on, every time we hung out, grabbing coffee, walking our dogs, she'd slip into French occasionally. I kept the charade going by nodding, laughing when she laughed, and blurting out basic phrases like, "Je comprends," and exactement, at strategic moments. It was working. Stupidly, shockingly, it was working. We got closer. One night we kissed on my couch after watching Amélie with the subtitles off, and I had no idea what anyone was saying. It didn't matter. We were happy. Then came the dinner. Camille works in international logistics and told me her company was hosting clients from France for a dinner at a high-end French restaurant downtown. She was nervous. Apparently her boss had asked for volunteers who could speak French to help make the clients feel more at home. I should have run. I should have moved to another state. Instead, in a moment of brain-dead male bravado, I said, "You want me to come? I'd love to help out. Practice my French a bit." Her eyes lit up. She kissed me and said I was amazing. Fast forward to the night of the dinner. I show up in a suit I hadn't worn since my cousin's wedding, heart pounding like a jackhammer. We're seated with Camille, her boss, a stern, silver-haired woman named Joan, 2 French clients, Bernard and Eloise, and a couple of other employees. The first half hour goes okay. Camille does most of the talking. I say enchanté when I shake hands. I nod. I smile. I drink a lot of wine. Bernard starts to warm up to me. Then Joan drops the bomb. "Camille said you speak French. Could you help translate a bit?" Bernard is trying to explain something about their port logistics model. I look at Camille. She gives me a sweet, encouraging smile that says, "You've got this, reader, I did not have this." Bernard launches into a long explanation in rapid French, gesturing, using words I'm sure aren't in any French course ever made. I nod like an idiot. He looks at me expectantly. Everyone is looking at me. I have 2 choices, admit everything, or double down. So I double down. I say, Bernard was just saying that their port scheduling has been optimized using a modular framework that allows for flexibility with international time zones, and they're looking to integrate a customs AI interface. The entire table goes silent. Joan raises an eyebrow. Camille tilts her head. Bernard blinks and says, "Pardon?" Then it happens, Eloise bursts out laughing. I mean wheezing. She's laughing so hard she's wiping tears. Bernard starts chuckling too. Camille gives me a confused look and switches to English. "What did you say?" Eloise, still laughing, translates. Bernard was talking about how bad the coffee is in the hotel lobby and how he misses his espresso machine back home. I want the earth to swallow me whole. Joan leans back in her chair with the kind of slow, amused disappointment that could curdle milk. Camille is staring at me, realization dawning. "You don't speak French, do you?" she asks. There's no escape now. I mumble something about Duolingo and trying to impress her. Joan mutters, "I'll take it from here," and the rest of the dinner passes with me silently sipping wine, cheeks burning. Camille doesn't say much as we drive home. When we get to my building, she stands outside the elevator and says, "Why didn't you just tell me the truth?" I say, "Because I liked you. And I thought if you knew I wasn't special or cool or cultured, you wouldn't feel the same." She sighs. "You didn't need to impress me. I liked you because you were funny and kind. Not because I thought you were fluent in French." She went up to her apartment. I went back to mine. That night, I downloaded every French learning app one could find. I started actually studying, for real this time. Not for a lie, but because I wanted to be better. A week later, I left a note under her door. It just said, "Je suis désolé. Voulez-vous prendre un café?" She texted me that night. We're still working on things. But now, when she speaks French, I try my best to understand, and I tell her when I don't. And I'll never, ever pretend to be something I'm not again. TIFU by accidentally sending a very personal message to my boss instead of my girlfriend. This all started on a regular Wednesday morning. I had just woken up, rushed to the bathroom, and tried to get myself ready for work in record time. I had a 9 a.m. meeting, and I wasn't going to be late, not today. My mornings are usually a blur, quick shower, grabbing clothes, chugging coffee, and dashing out the door, but this morning, something happened that would completely derail my life for the next few hours. You see, I've been dating my girlfriend for about a year now. We have a great relationship, and like any couple, we exchange sweet messages throughout the day. That morning, she sent me a good morning text. It was one of those messages where she mentioned how much she missed me and that she couldn't wait to see me later that evening. I was feeling a little frisky, so I decided to send her a message back that was, well, a bit more intimate than usual. I was about to head out when I received a Slack message from my boss, Tim. It was a simple "Hey, can you give me an update on the XYZ project? Need it for the meeting." As soon as I saw it, I thought to myself, okay, I'll just quickly respond and then get moving. I started typing a reply in Slack, nothing too complicated, just a quick "Yeah, all good. The latest progress report is done, I'll send it to you in 5. But here's where things went wrong. While I was typing that, my phone buzzed again. It was a message from my girlfriend, and she had sent a cute selfie of herself, all dressed up for work. She looked beautiful, and I couldn't help myself. I decided to send her a playful reply to match the vibe, something that would show her I was thinking of her. I opened up the messages with her on my phone, got distracted by her adorable selfie, and then, well, my fingers did what fingers do when they're in a rush, they typed a response before I even thought about it. I sent her something a little spicy. It was an offhand comment about how much I was looking forward to seeing her later and how I couldn't wait to have some fun. I hit send without hesitation because I was feeling confident and wanted to keep the mood light. But here's where the problem occurred. My phone screen was still open on Slack, and not on the text thread with my girlfriend. What I didn't realize was that, in my rush, I had mistakenly sent that intimate message to my boss, Tim. I didn't notice right away. I continued to respond to his Slack message about the project, oblivious to the fact that my boss had just received a message intended for my girlfriend that was wildly inappropriate. It wasn't until I saw Tim's response pop up in the Slack window that my stomach sank into my feet. What exactly do you mean by looking forward to having some fun later? I froze. My heart dropped. My palms immediately went clammy. I didn't know how to respond. My mind raced. My thoughts went something like this: did he think this was a joke? Could he have known it was a mistake? I was internally panicking, but on the outside, I had to keep my cool. I typed a response back, trying to salvage what was left of my dignity. Sorry, Tim. That was meant for someone else. My girlfriend. Definitely not for you. I tried to be as professional as I could, but I knew that message was already a disaster. But Tim wasn't done yet. His reply came in almost immediately. Okay, well, I guess we all need some personal time, but maybe keep it PG in work-related chats. I felt the blood draining from my face. I was now mortified. Not only had I sent an incredibly personal message to my boss, but he had actually read it. Worse still, he acknowledged it. At that point, I would have done anything to be able to crawl under my desk and hide. I sat there staring at my computer screen for a few minutes, unsure of what to do next. Should I apologize more? Should I make some kind of joke to lighten the mood? I couldn't think straight. In a fit of panic, I decided to just go silent. I didn't respond for the next several minutes, hoping the conversation would fade away and that Tim would forget about it. But no, he didn't forget. He's not that kind of guy. Hey, when you have a moment, let's talk about the project in person. I want to discuss some things. That was the message that came through next. I immediately knew what that meant. Tim was asking me to come into his office. My brain short-circuited. I was about to walk into a meeting with my boss, and he was going to bring up the weirdest thing that had ever happened in a professional setting. I gathered up every ounce of courage I had and walked to his office. I knocked on the door and let myself in, trying my best to act normal. Hey Tim, you wanted to talk? I said, trying to mask the awkwardness. Tim motioned for me to sit down. His expression was neutral, but I could tell there was an undertone of amusement in his eyes. Yeah, he said, leaning back in his chair, so, I'm not sure if you noticed, but you sent me a rather interesting message earlier. I wanted to die. I literally wanted to just disappear. I know, Tim. I'm so sorry. That was a huge mistake. I was texting my girlfriend and I got confused and it just, slipped out. I was stammering, my face turning beet red. To his credit, Tim didn't laugh or make it worse. He just sighed and shook his head. Look, man, it happens. Just try to keep personal stuff out of work channels next time, okay? This doesn't need to go any further, but we all know this was an awkward situation. Let's just move on. I nodded furiously, hoping to get out of there as fast as possible. He seemed to let it go, and we quickly shifted to work topics, but the damage had already been done. Every time I saw him after that, all I could think about was the fact that he had read a message I intended for my girlfriend that had absolutely no business in a work conversation. I don't know what was worse, getting caught in an embarrassing mistake or the fact that Tim was now silently judging me for sending an inappropriate message to my boss. Either way, it was an experience I won't be forgetting anytime soon. The moral of the story: double-check who you're texting before you send anything that could cause way more discomfort than you ever intended. Also, maybe don't keep your personal life and work messages on the same platform. Lesson learned, folks. It all started on a typical Thursday morning. I had just finished my first cup of coffee, checked my emails, and was getting ready to head into work. Now, I work from home, which means I don't have to deal with the usual morning commute or rush hour stress. However, there's one thing I didn't account for that day: the neighbor's dog. For context, I live in a suburban neighborhood with houses that are close enough together to hear the occasional conversation if someone's being loud enough. Most of the time, it's a quiet place. That is, except for this one dog. I'm not sure what breed it is, but it's one of those smaller, hyperactive dogs that thinks it's a lion. It barks at everything. A leaf falls from a tree? Bark. The wind blows too hard? Bark. Someone walks past its house? Bark. You get the idea. Now, normally, I wouldn't mind. I'm used to the occasional dog bark, but this morning was different. The barking started early, right around 6:30 a.m., which is unusual for the dog. It usually sleeps in a bit longer, which I always appreciated. But today, the barking was non-stop. I tried to ignore it, but the sound was so grating that it became impossible to focus on anything. After about an hour of it, I decided I'd had enough. I've never spoken to the neighbors directly, but we've waved at each other a few times when we've both been outside at the same time. So, I thought, why not? I'll just politely ask them if they could do something about the dog for a bit. Simple, right? I grabbed my jacket, threw on my shoes, and walked outside. As I approached their front door, I noticed that the barking was still going strong, and it sounded like it was coming from somewhere in their house. I knocked on the door and waited. A few seconds later, the door opened, and a woman in her late 30s appeared. She looked like she had just woken up, her hair disheveled and her eyes a little bleary. "Hi, I'm sorry to bother you, but I live next door, and your dog has been barking for about an hour now, and I'm having trouble focusing on work. Is there any chance you could bring it inside or do something to quiet it down a bit?" I asked, trying to sound as polite as possible. The woman looked at me for a second, a little confused. "Oh, I'm sorry. She's probably just excited. I can't really do anything about it right now though, she's in heat." I raised an eyebrow. "In heat?" "Yeah," she replied with a nonchalant shrug. "She's in heat, so she barks more. It's just a phase, it'll be over soon." I tried to hide my surprise. I didn't realize dogs in heat would affect them like that. I also didn't expect the casualness with which she was telling me this. "Oh, I didn't know that." "Well, I understand. I just wanted to check if there was anything that could be done. I'm working from home, and it's really hard to concentrate." She seemed to think for a moment before responding, "Well, if it's that bad, you could try calling animal control. Maybe they can help." At that point, I didn't know what to say. I wasn't about to call animal control on a barking dog. That seemed extreme, and honestly, I felt like I was just bothering her over something minor. So, I nodded politely and thanked her for her time, turning to head back to my house. As I walked back across the lawn, I started to get a bit more frustrated. The dog wasn't just barking, it was practically screaming at the top of its lungs. It was really starting to get under my skin. I wanted to get back to work, but my concentration was shattered. That's when I made the worst decision I could have possibly made. I went back inside and started pacing around. After a few minutes of fuming, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I wasn't going to call animal control, but I did have one idea. There was something I could do to make the dog stop barking, at least for a while. You see, I've always been a bit of a prankster, and over the years, I've accumulated a few unique tools for these types of situations. I went into my garage and pulled out a small air horn. You know the kind you can get at sporting events? Yeah, that one. I wasn't sure if it would actually work, but I figured it was worth a shot. I loaded up the air horn, walked back outside, and positioned myself just behind the row of hedges that separated our yards. From there, I could clearly hear the dog still barking its head off. Without giving it a second thought, I pressed the button and released a blast of sound so loud I'm pretty sure it startled every living creature within a mile radius. At first, there was silence. I stood there, half expecting the dog to stop barking immediately. But then, to my horror, the barking didn't stop. It actually got worse. The dog was absolutely losing its mind. It was like I'd unleashed some sort of primal, demon-like rage in the creature. The barking became frantic, and it was like it was barking directly at me, accusing me of something terrible. Then, I heard the woman's voice from the front door. What the hell was that? I froze. She had heard me. It didn't take a genius to figure out that the noise was not appreciated. I quickly sprinted back to my house and tried to calm myself down. What had I just done? I'd intentionally disturbed the dog even more, and, in the process, I had probably angered my neighbors. My hands were shaking, and my mind was racing as I tried to figure out what my next move should be. About 10 minutes later, I heard the distinct sound of a car door slamming shut. I peeked out my window and saw the woman from next door driving off in her car, her dog still barking in the background. It wasn't until later that afternoon that I found out just how bad things had gotten. I had almost forgotten about the incident, but my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. I answered, and it turned out to be the woman from next door. She sounded absolutely furious. I don't know what your problem is, she started, but you need to stop messing with my dog. That air horn you used caused her to go into a panic attack. She's been shaking ever since, and I'm not going to let you get away with this. I immediately felt a wave of guilt hit me. I had never intended for anything like that to happen. I apologized profusely, but the damage was done. She told me she was calling animal control and would be reporting the incident. I promised to make it up to her somehow, but at that point, I knew there was no going back. The moral of the story? Never mess with a dog's natural instincts. And if your neighbors have a dog in heat, maybe just let it run its course rather than making a bad situation worse. I'm still dealing with the fallout of this, and honestly, I'll probably avoid my neighbors for a while. So, yeah. That was my TIFU. TIFU by accidentally setting my house on fire while trying to impress my girlfriend with my cooking skills. I've always been the I'll fix it type of guy. When something's broken or needs doing, I take it upon myself to figure it out. Whether it's assembling furniture or fixing a leaky pipe, I'm your guy. But when it comes to cooking, well, I'd say my skills are questionable at best. I'm the kind of person who burns toast and has to read the instructions on a box of mac and cheese like it's an ancient scroll of wisdom. Still, I've been trying to improve. Enter my girlfriend, Sarah. She's an amazing cook. Seriously, the woman could make a 5-star meal out of a can of beans and some expired noodles. Every time we've had dinner together, she's been the one in the kitchen, and I've been the one trying to help in the most unhelpful ways imaginable. One time, I thought it was a good idea to add a little extra salt, and she almost threw me out of the kitchen. Ever since, I've been trying to prove that I can actually cook something edible, mostly because I didn't want to be known as the guy who can't make a decent meal for his girlfriend. So, a few weeks ago, I decided to do something special for Sarah. I wanted to cook her a fancy dinner. Nothing too complicated, just a nice meal with some candles and a bottle of wine. I figured if I could pull this off, I'd finally earn a little cooking street cred. Now, to set the stage, I knew we were going to be spending the evening at her place, so I decided to cook at mine. I went to the store earlier that day, picked up a bunch of ingredients, and researched recipes for a nice chicken dish. Simple, right? Chicken, some herbs, a side of vegetables. That's easy enough, I thought. I didn't need to be Gordon Ramsay, just not a complete disaster. I got home, prepped everything, and started getting the kitchen ready. I even bought fancy candles to make the place look more romantic. It was all coming together, and I felt pretty good about myself. In fact, I was kind of getting cocky. I was going to cook this meal, and it was going to be amazing. The first step was to sear the chicken. I knew this was the most important part, get that perfect golden brown crust on the outside while keeping it juicy on the inside. I set my pan to medium-high heat and threw in a bit of olive oil. Things were going well at first. The oil was heating up nicely, the chicken was sizzling, and I thought, hey, maybe I actually do know what I'm doing. But I'd forgotten one crucial detail, I'm an idiot. Somewhere in the midst of trying to juggle two things at once, stirring the chicken, checking the recipe, setting up the candles, I failed to notice that the oil in the pan was starting to smoke. The smell was kind of burning, but I was too busy with everything else. I turned the heat up a little more to try to get a crispier crust. It only took a minute for the smell to turn into something far worse. I looked at the pan and saw that the oil was visibly bubbling in a way I'd never seen before. The chicken was no longer sizzling, it was frying in some weird, bubbling, blackened oil bath. At this point, I had two choices. I could either remove the chicken and try to salvage it, or I could ignore it and continue down the path of destruction. Guess which option I chose? I went for the let's go for it route and tried to flip the chicken. Big mistake. As soon as I touched the chicken with the spatula, the oil splashed up and hit the burner. A small flame shot up from the stove, but I didn't panic. I figured I could just smother it with a towel or put the lid on the pan. But in my heightened state of I'm gonna nail this, I made another horrible choice. I grabbed the nearest towel, which just so happened to be hanging over the oven door. When I grabbed the towel, I didn't notice that the oven had been on for a while, since I had preheated it for the sides, and it was about 400 degrees inside. The towel instantly caught fire. Now, I want you to picture this. There I am, standing in my kitchen, holding a flaming towel in one hand, while the chicken in the pan is creating a small, oily inferno in front of me. For a second, I just stood there. My brain short-circuited. I couldn't decide whether to drop the towel, put out the fire, or, God forbid, deal with the chicken, which was now emitting some kind of toxic-smelling smoke. But then, I snapped into action, because I was a man on a mission. I was not going to let this fire ruin my dinner. So, I panicked and tried to throw the towel into the sink. Naturally, the towel missed. It hit the floor, catching more of my kitchen on fire. The fire on the stove was now raging in full glory. At this point, I was completely out of my depth. I picked up the towel and tried to smother the flames with it, but all I managed to do was make the fire spread to the nearby countertop, which was conveniently stacked with paper towels, napkins, and a bunch of other fire-friendly materials. I screamed in horror. It was like a scene from a bad disaster movie. The fire alarm went off, the smoke filled the kitchen, and I was standing there in complete shock, trying to figure out how to stop this fire before it burned the whole house down. I did what anyone in my situation would do. I ran out of the kitchen, yelling for Sarah. I called her, but of course, she didn't answer. In desperation, I dialed 911. I explained the situation as clearly as I could, stammering through the details. They told me to evacuate the building immediately and that the fire department was on the way. I bolted out of my apartment and stood in the parking lot, watching the flames flicker through the window. Sarah showed up about 10 minutes later. She was confused, worried, and a little freaked out. When I told her I'd started a fire in the kitchen, she didn't believe me at first. I had to show her the charred remnants of my once proud dinner. The fire department showed up shortly after, extinguished the flames, and assured me the damage was minimal, just some smoke damage and a ruined stove. The whole ordeal took a good hour, and by the time it was over, the only thing left was my shattered ego and the smell of burnt chicken in the air. Sarah was a trooper about it, though. She didn't laugh at me, at least not until later. She said we'd just order takeout, but I could see the what the hell just happened look in her eyes. She didn't break up with me, but I'm pretty sure she's never going to let me cook again. I learned a valuable lesson that night: never attempt a complex meal when you have no idea what you're doing. And if you're going to try and impress someone, maybe start with something that won't catch on fire. And that's how I accidentally set my house on fire trying to cook a simple dinner. TLDR, tried to cook a fancy dinner for my girlfriend, accidentally set my kitchen on fire, and nearly burned down the house. The fire department had to come. Still single-handedly ruined my own reputation as a cook. TIFU, by accidentally ruining my best friend's wedding, and I don't even know how to fix it. It all started a few months ago. My best friend, Amanda, had been planning her dream wedding for over a year. She and her fiancé, Tom, had been together for nearly 5 years, and I was beyond excited to be her maid of honor. I had always imagined this moment, helping her pick out the perfect dress, managing all the little details, and standing by her side as she walked down the aisle. We'd been through thick and thin, and I couldn't wait to make this day as perfect as possible for her. The first sign that things might go wrong came during the dress fitting. Amanda had been obsessing over this one particular gown for months, and when she finally tried it on, she burst into tears. At first, I thought it was because the dress was perfect, but it turned out to be a mix of nerves, excitement, and the pressure of everything coming together. I did my best to comfort her, telling her how beautiful she looked, but in the back of my mind, I couldn't help but think that she was putting way too much stress on herself. I chalked it up to wedding jitters, though. A couple of weeks before the wedding, Amanda asked me to help with the bridal shower. She was very particular about the details, down to the tiniest things, decorations, food, games, and the invitations. I agreed to help, of course, but by the time the event arrived, I was feeling overwhelmed. I was juggling work, my personal life, and helping Amanda out, so my stress levels were through the roof. But I didn't want to let her down, so I powered through. The shower was a success in the end, but as soon as it was over, Amanda came to me, a little teary-eyed. She thanked me profusely, saying how much she appreciated everything I'd done, but there was one thing she wanted to talk to me about. She pulled me aside and told me that she'd been having second thoughts about Tom, the wedding, and whether she was making the right decision. This, of course, sent me into full panic mode. I've known Tom for years, and although he's a little quirky, I always thought they were perfect for each other. I told Amanda that it was normal to feel nervous before such a big commitment, but she needed to trust herself and her heart. She assured me that she was fine, but the lingering doubt in her eyes told me otherwise. Still, I didn't want to interfere too much, so I did what I could to ease her worries and pushed the thought out of my mind. After all, what could go wrong? Right? Fast forward to the day before the wedding. The rehearsal dinner went off without a hitch, but there were still a few small details to work out. I had been given the task of overseeing the wedding gifts and ensuring everything was set up for the ceremony. I figured it was an easy enough job, so I took a break to grab a coffee and check my phone. I wasn't expecting anything unusual, but when I opened my messages, I found one from Tom. It was a simple text saying, "Hey, we need to talk about something. Can you come by the hotel tonight?" This immediately sent me into a spiral. I had no idea what he could possibly want to talk about, but I figured it was nothing too serious. So, after my coffee, I went over to the hotel to meet him. When I arrived, Tom greeted me with a forced smile. He looked nervous, which I thought was odd. We sat down in the hotel lobby, and he immediately launched into what turned out to be a complete disaster of a conversation. "Listen," he said, his voice shaky, "I've been thinking a lot about the wedding, and I need to tell you something." My heart dropped. I didn't know what to expect, but I definitely didn't expect what came next. "I'm not sure I'm ready for this," he said. "I love Amanda, but there's been this other woman, and I've been seeing her for the past few months." I was in complete shock. My mind raced as he continued to explain how he'd gotten emotionally involved with someone else and wasn't sure if he was ready to get married. He said he wasn't sure what to do. I had no idea how to process this, but I knew I couldn't tell Amanda, not like this. I also knew that if I didn't say anything, things would implode at the wedding the next day. I panicked. "Look," I said, trying to maintain some semblance of calm, "I don't know what to say." "You need to tell her, Tom. You can't just leave her hanging tomorrow. She deserves the truth." Tom's eyes welled up with tears, and he nodded. "You're right. I'll tell her tomorrow." But then, because I was an absolute idiot, I did something that would haunt me for the rest of my life. I told him, "What if you tell her today? If you do it now, maybe it won't ruin the wedding. It's already such a stressful time, but if you get it over with tonight, maybe she'll have time to process it before the ceremony." Tom looked at me like I'd just suggested he set himself on fire. "You want me to tell her tonight? Are you serious?" But I kept pushing, convincing him that it was better to do it sooner rather than later, so they could deal with the fallout before the big day. I was a mess, but I thought I was helping. I told him to go to Amanda's hotel room and be honest with her. If he didn't, it would be a disaster. Tom reluctantly agreed and left to talk to Amanda. I didn't know what else to do, so I returned to the wedding venue to finish setting up. I couldn't stop shaking, and I was starting to feel nauseous, but I convinced myself that I had done the right thing. The more I thought about it, the more I figured Amanda would thank me later for pushing Tom to come clean. He was being a coward, and I was just trying to protect her. But then, the worst thing happened. I received a call from Amanda a few hours later. Her voice was unrecognizable, screaming, sobbing, and full of raw emotion. She asked me what I knew, and I was too terrified to lie. When she found out I'd encouraged Tom to confess the night before the wedding, she was furious. Apparently, Tom hadn't handled the conversation well at all. He had broken down, said he wasn't sure he wanted to go through with the wedding, and told her that there was someone else. The fallout was catastrophic, and Amanda was shattered. She said she never wanted to speak to me again. I spent the next several days in complete agony. I ruined her wedding, I ruined her relationship, and I couldn't undo it. She and Tom broke up, and I couldn't stop blaming myself for what I'd done. In the end, I learned that sometimes, no matter how well-intentioned we are, pushing people to act on something they're not ready to face only makes things worse. If I'd just let Tom take the lead and handle things on his own, maybe Amanda would have had the wedding she dreamed of. Instead, I'll forever be known as the person who ruined it all. It's been 6 months since the wedding debacle, and Amanda and I haven't spoken since that night. I'm not sure if we'll ever repair our friendship, but I've learned the hard way that some things are better left alone. Sometimes, people need to figure things out on their own, and no matter how much we want to help, there's no fixing everything. So, yeah. TIFU by trying to help and ruining everything instead. TIFU by taking a job offer that turned out to be a nightmare. So, here's the deal. A couple of months ago, I got offered a job at a company I thought was going to be a dream come true. I had been struggling to find the right fit for a while. I had been working at a mediocre office job for years, just scraping by, with a boss who couldn't care less about the team. I had been stuck in a rut, feeling like my career was going nowhere fast. So when this new company came along and offered me the opportunity to work for them, I jumped at the chance. The job description was everything I could have asked for: flexible hours, a supportive team, a creative environment, and plenty of growth opportunities. The pay was significantly higher than what I was making at my previous job, and the benefits package seemed like it had come straight out of a dream. It seemed like I had hit the jackpot. Plus, the office was located in a trendy part of the city, and it felt like everything was falling into place. On the first day, I showed up at the office early, eager to make a good impression. I had done all the research, studied their website, and watched every video on YouTube about their company culture. It was all about innovation, teamwork, and pushing boundaries, which was exactly what I needed in my life. I could already picture myself thriving in this new environment. When I walked into the office, I was immediately impressed by the modern, open-concept space. The atmosphere was light, with people chatting over coffee and brainstorming ideas. My new colleagues seemed like they had it all together, and the vibe was one of ambition and creativity. The CEO introduced herself to me with a warm handshake, and she seemed so down-to-earth, unlike the high-powered execs I was used to. Everything was perfect until it wasn't. The first red flag came during my onboarding process. I had been told that there was a comprehensive training program, but when I asked about it, I was told, "Oh, don't worry about that. We believe in learning by doing." I thought, all right, I'm flexible, I can figure things out on the fly. And so, I did. The second red flag came when I was given my first project. It was a huge task, involving multiple teams and a tight deadline. I didn't think much of it at first. After all, they had hired me for this, right? But as I dug deeper into the project, I realized that none of the teams seemed to be on the same page. No one knew what anyone else was doing, and the communication was abysmal. People were too busy trying to impress the higher-ups with half-baked ideas to bother actually collaborating. I felt like I was stuck in the middle, trying to patch everything together without much support. Despite this, I pushed through. I spent late nights at the office, trying to get everything done. But things kept spiraling. No one followed through with their commitments, and every time I asked for help or clarification, I got vague answers or just outright ignored. I was frustrated but figured this was just the reality of a fast-paced startup environment, and I had to learn to deal with it. The turning point came 2 weeks later. I had worked my butt off, staying at the office until midnight most nights. The project was due to be presented to the board of directors, and I was tasked with presenting it. When the day finally arrived, I was confident that, despite the chaos, I had managed to pull something together that I could be proud of. I had prepared my slides, rehearsed my speech, and was ready to show them my hard work. That's when I found out just how much of a joke the company culture really was. The CEO called a last-minute meeting just before the presentation. She explained that they had decided to pivot the entire project in a different direction. I was caught off guard. No one had mentioned this before, and it was already too late to change anything. I asked why they hadn't informed me sooner, to which she replied, "Well, we thought you'd figure it out on your own." Needless to say, my presentation was a disaster. The board members were unimpressed, and the CEO looked visibly annoyed. My boss, who had been a silent observer the whole time, didn't even bother to give me any feedback afterward. Instead, he just said, "We'll talk later," and walked off. I was humiliated, and I spent the rest of the day trying to salvage whatever was left of my dignity. But it didn't end there. Over the next few weeks, things went from bad to worse. It became clear that the growth opportunities they had promised me were just a marketing tactic to get talented people like me to join their sinking ship. The CEO was constantly changing the company's direction without communicating with anyone, and the rest of the management team seemed to be equally clueless. The culture I had bought into was nothing but smoke and mirrors. No one cared about anything except appearances, and it felt like I was working for a bunch of overambitious people who were more concerned with looking good on social media than actually running a functional business. At one point, I asked my direct manager if there was any kind of support I could receive to help me handle the workload, and he casually told me that this is what being a part of an innovative company feels like. It hit me then that I wasn't a part of an innovative company, I was just a cog in an overcomplicated, mismanaged machine. But here's where it gets really messed up. A few weeks ago, I found out through a colleague that the CEO had been telling potential clients that I was one of their top performers and that I had successfully led a major project, despite the fact that I had barely made it through the last one. She had made up an entire narrative about my role in the company that was completely divorced from reality. I was shocked and a little scared, honestly. It wasn't just a lie, it was a lie that directly impacted my reputation. At that point, I realized I needed to get out. I started job hunting again, but this time, it was different. I couldn't just look for another shiny, perfect job. I needed to find a place where I could actually contribute and grow without constantly feeling like I was drowning. Last week, I handed in my resignation letter, and while I was relieved to leave, I couldn't shake the feeling of how much time I had wasted in that toxic environment. In the end, it was a hard lesson learned. If something sounds too good to be true, it probably is. So here I am, back on the job market again, wiser but also a little more jaded. But I'll be damned if I let myself fall for another empty promise from a company that doesn't know what it's doing. TLDR, took a job at what I thought was my dream company, only to realize it was a disorganized nightmare with toxic management. Spent weeks scrambling to keep up, eventually handed in my resignation, and am now job hunting again. Never again. So, a few days ago, I decided to make an extra special dinner for my girlfriend. We've been dating for a couple of months now, and everything has been going really well. I thought I could take things to the next level and surprise her with a fancy home-cooked meal. In hindsight, this was a horrible idea, but I had good intentions at the time. I'm not a terrible cook. I've made pasta, grilled chicken, and scrambled eggs 1,000 times, but I've never really done anything fancy like steaks or sauces that require actual skill. I figured a nice steak dinner would impress her. After all, it's a simple yet elegant dish that people always seem to love. So, I started planning everything. I wanted to go above and beyond, so I even bought a bottle of fancy red wine to pair with the meal. I was feeling pretty confident about it. The recipe I chose was something I found online. It was a pan-seared steak with a butter and garlic sauce. The kind of recipe you see on food blogs with pictures of perfectly seared steaks and glassy, mouth-watering sauces. You know the ones I'm talking about. The kind that make you believe you could cook like a professional chef if you just followed the instructions. So, I bought a couple of premium steaks, some fresh herbs, garlic and, of course, butter. I was ready to impress her. I didn't tell my girlfriend about the dinner plans because I wanted it to be a surprise. She'd be coming over after work, and I'd have everything ready by the time she got here. I started cooking a few hours before she was supposed to arrive to make sure I had enough time to nail the meal. And that's when the problem started. First, I wanted to get the perfect sear on the steaks, which meant cranking the heat on the stove. I was following the recipe closely, but of course, I didn't really think through the timing. I threw the steaks into the hot pan, but I didn't realize just how hot the pan was. The oil in the pan immediately started smoking like I was trying to start a small bonfire in my kitchen. But, determined not to back down, I kept going. I told myself the recipe would work out, even though things were already going wrong. As the steaks cooked, I prepared the garlic butter sauce, which involved melting butter and adding garlic, thyme, and a few other herbs into the mix. Everything seemed to be going fine, until I realized the smoke from the pan was filling up the entire kitchen. I opened a window, but it didn't seem to help much. I wasn't panicking yet, though. I figured I could deal with it later. Now, I should mention that my kitchen is not the most well-ventilated. It's in an older apartment, and the extractor fan above the stove works, but it's not the most powerful. So when the smoke started building up, it didn't clear out quickly. And then, the real disaster happened. While the steaks were searing, I went to check on the wine I had opened earlier. I figured I could pour myself a glass to enjoy while I finished cooking. I turned around to grab the glass and, this is where I completely lost my focus. When I turned back to the stove, I saw that the pan was now fully engulfed in flames. At first, I thought it was just some smoke and maybe a little flare-up, but no. The flames were real. Real, high, and terrifying flames. For a split second, I froze. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. It was like something out of a disaster movie, except this wasn't a movie. This was my kitchen. And it was on fire. I don't know why I thought it was a good idea, but instead of grabbing a fire extinguisher, I ran to the sink and splashed water onto the pan. And, of course, this made things infinitely worse. The flames shot up even higher, and the pan was now practically a torch. It felt like the entire apartment was going to go up in smoke. I panicked. In the midst of all this chaos, I grabbed my phone and called my girlfriend. Hey, I've got a slight situation over here, I said, trying to sound calm. There's a bit of a fire, but don't worry, everything's fine. I've got it under control. I don't know why I thought this was a good idea, but I didn't want her to be alarmed yet. I figured I could handle it, and I didn't want to ruin the surprise dinner. Her immediate response was something like, "What? What do you mean, a fire?" I managed to grab the pan with the flaming steaks and threw it into the sink, where I thought I could douse the flames with water, which, as you can guess, was a terrible idea. The kitchen was now full of smoke, and the smell of burnt food lingered in the air like a ghost. At this point, I could hear my girlfriend's voice on the phone, sounding increasingly concerned. "Are you okay?" she asked, clearly not convinced by my earlier attempt to downplay the situation. I hung up on her because I thought I could at least deal with the fire first and let her know later that everything was fine. But by the time I got the flames down, the damage was done. The pan was ruined, the kitchen smelled like something had exploded, and the steaks, well, they were completely burnt to a crisp. I checked the fire alarm, and of course, it had gone off during the whole ordeal. I quickly ran to silence it, but the apartment was still thick with smoke. At this point, I felt like I had ruined everything. The dinner, my reputation as someone who can cook, and most importantly, the surprise I was planning for my girlfriend. When she arrived, I had no choice but to apologize. I greeted her at the door with a sheepish smile and immediately led her into the kitchen, which was an absolute disaster. I showed her the burnt remnants of what was supposed to be a fancy dinner and explained how it all went wrong. She was sweet about it, trying to suppress her laughter while assuring me that it wasn't a big deal. But I could tell she was trying not to burst out laughing. We ended up ordering takeout instead, and while it wasn't the dinner I had planned, we had a great time. In the end, it wasn't about the food anyway. We spent the evening talking, laughing, and enjoying each other's company. But I will never, ever try to cook a fancy dinner again, at least not without a fire extinguisher nearby. The only thing that was well done that night was my embarrassing attempt at cooking. Lesson learned: stick to simple meals and leave the gourmet cooking to the professionals. And, maybe read the manual for your kitchen equipment too. Hey, friends! If you enjoy this content, don't forget to like the video and share your thoughts in the comments. We really want to know what you like and what can be improved. What do you think of the video? Are there any topics you'd like to see in future videos? Your feedback really helps us get better. Thanks for being with us. TIFU by pretending to know how to grill for my family's barbecue and almost burning down the house. So, for context, I'm a 28-year-old guy who's always been more of a let me order takeout type of person when it comes to food. Cooking is just not my thing. I don't know the first thing about the kitchen, let alone grilling. But this year, I decided I wanted to be a man and finally show my family that I could do the whole grill master thing. It's a barbecue, how hard can it be, right? It all started when my cousin, who is a pro at grilling and smokes meat like a champion, invited everyone to his place for a family barbecue. The whole family was going to be there, parents, aunts, uncles, cousins, the whole lot of them. Everyone was going to be bringing food, and it was shaping up to be a pretty big event. So here's the deal: my cousin, the grill master, tells me he won't be able to make it in time. He had a work thing or something, I'm not really sure. But he basically said, "Hey, you're up. Don't burn anything down." The problem? I had literally never touched a grill in my life. I mean, I've seen people grill before, I've watched the YouTube videos, and I've eaten plenty of grilled food, so how hard could it be to just throw some burgers and hot dogs on the grill and flip them every now and then? This is where my first mistake happened. I went to my local supermarket the day before the barbecue to get everything I thought I needed. The list seemed simple: burgers, hot dogs, buns, and a bunch of condiments. I also grabbed a pack of charcoal because, from what I understood, that was the key to grilling. I'm sure I didn't look like I knew what I was doing when I was wandering through the grilling aisle, but I didn't care. Confidence was key. That night, I watched a few YouTube tutorials on how to start a charcoal grill. Seems easy enough. You light the charcoal, let it burn down a bit, and then throw the meat on. Simple, right? Wrong. The next day, I arrive at my cousin's house about an hour before the event starts, determined to prove myself. I set up the grill, which is a gigantic gas and charcoal hybrid monstrosity. It was a beast, and I had no idea how to operate it. The instructions were not helpful, especially since half of them were in some weird shorthand that looked like it was meant for seasoned grillers, not amateurs like me. I grabbed a lighter, fired up the grill, and threw the charcoal in. But here's where things started to spiral. I didn't know the first thing about getting the fire going. I kept lighting the lighter fluid, but it was barely making a difference. The charcoal was still cold, and the whole thing was just smoking. I wasn't sure if I was even using the right type of charcoal. Was there a right type? Was there a temperature I was supposed to be aiming for? As I'm standing there, holding the lighter fluid like some kind of reckless teenager, the grill next to me starts smoking heavily. I could feel my face heating up from the constant waves of smoke, but I was determined to make this work. I pushed the grill's ignition button, hoping for some sort of miracle. Instead, I got a flare-up, and suddenly there were flames shooting up from the grill. My heart skipped a beat. I had absolutely no idea what I was doing. I panicked. Full-on panic mode. I tried to close the lid to smother the flames, but it didn't work. The fire just got bigger. I was terrified that the whole thing was going to explode, so I ran inside to get a bucket of water, because, in my mind, that's what you do when things catch fire, right? As I'm sprinting back to the grill, I see my aunt and uncle coming out of the house, clearly noticing the inferno I had created. My aunt, who's like the family's self-appointed safety officer, starts yelling at me to stop and let the grill do its thing. But I wasn't listening. My mind was screaming that the fire would consume everything, including my chances of ever being invited to another family event. In a panic-fueled attempt to control the situation, I grabbed a fire extinguisher from the shed. Now, let me be clear, I had never used a fire extinguisher in my life. I pulled the pin and squeezed the trigger with what I thought was the right amount of force. But no. Instead of dispersing the powder evenly, the fire extinguisher shot out in one massive blast, covering everything around it in this thick white foam. The fire was still burning, and now I had foam all over me and the grill. It looked like I'd been attacked by a cloud of shaving cream. It didn't help that the foam was now covering the charcoal and food, making everything soggy and impossible to salvage. My family had gathered around by now, and they were all standing there, staring in disbelief at the chaos I had caused. My cousin, who had arrived just in time to witness this disaster, could barely suppress his laughter. He took one look at me and just said, "What in the hell are you doing?" I stood there, completely defeated. It was clear I wasn't going to be able to salvage this barbecue. The grill was completely useless, covered in foam and now emitting a strange burning smell that didn't seem right. The food was ruined, the grill was ruined, and my ego was shattered. To add insult to injury, my family, who had been so hopeful about my attempt to cook, ended up having to order a bunch of pizzas because nothing could be saved. I learned a valuable lesson that day: never pretend to know what you're doing when you don't have a clue. Just admit it, ask for help, and don't make the entire family wait for you to screw it up. In the end, I was crowned the Great Barbecue Disaster of 2025, and I'll be forever known as the guy who tried to grill but almost burned down the house. So yeah, that's how I ruined a barbecue and my reputation in one fell swoop. At least we got pizza. P.S. I'm never touching a grill again. TIFU by accidentally sending a sext to my grandmother. So, I've been thinking about this story for a while and, honestly, I'm still not sure if I should laugh or cry. Either way, it's been a journey, and I need to share this with someone who will truly understand. This just happened a couple of days ago, and I am still in disbelief about the whole thing. I'm 26, and I've been in a pretty serious relationship for almost a year now. We're both very comfortable with each other, and things have been going great. So, as you can imagine, there are plenty of intimate messages exchanged between the two of us. Everything from sweet notes to, well, let's just say, steamier things, if you catch my drift. Now, here's where it gets complicated. My family's pretty tight-knit, and we all use a group chat on WhatsApp to stay in touch. My mom, dad, aunts, uncles, cousins, we all share updates and keep each other in the loop. I know, it's a little old school, but it works for us. Anyway, about a week ago, I was texting my boyfriend in our private chat, and I got a little carried away. I had just finished a workout, was feeling good about myself, and started sending him some playful messages that were, let's say, very suggestive. I was typing away, thinking nothing of it. Then came the part where things went off the rails. I thought I was still in our private conversation when, in fact, I was actually typing in the family group chat. To make it worse, my grandmother, who is in her late 70s, is in this group. I love my grandma dearly. She's the kind of woman who can bake the best cookies you've ever had and tell you stories about her childhood that will leave you in stitches. But, as much as I adore her, I didn't exactly want her to get a full view of my less wholesome side. But there I was, furiously typing away at my phone, clearly sending the wrong message to the wrong person. I hit send without even realizing what had happened. The moment the message sent, my stomach dropped. I stared at the screen, watching in slow motion as the message appeared in the family group chat. "I can't wait for you to see me tonight. I'm going to wear that little outfit you love and show you just how much I missed you. Maybe I'll tease you a little bit first, though." There was a long, excruciating pause. And then, the reactions started rolling in. My mom responded first with a simple. My dad sent a string of question marks, clearly confused. My cousin Sarah, who's about my age, sent a crying emoji followed by, "OMG, what did you just do?" My aunt replied with a full-on WTF before following it up with, "Did you mean to send this to someone in particular?" At this point, I was in full panic mode. My phone was buzzing non-stop, and I could see everyone's responses flooding in. But the worst part was that my grandmother hadn't said anything yet. My heart was in my throat. I was about to be publicly roasted for the rest of my life, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. I quickly tried to delete the message, but you know how WhatsApp works, once it's sent, it's sent. There's no taking it back. I quickly typed a desperate message saying, "Sorry, wrong chat, totally meant to send this to / my boyfriend's name." But by that time, it was too late. The damage had been done. Then, the unthinkable happened. My grandmother, bless her sweet heart, responded. It was one of those responses that you don't even know how to interpret. She simply wrote, "Well, I'm not sure what that means, but I hope it makes you happy, dear. Just remember, it's important to be respectful of each other." I swear I've never been more mortified in my life. I couldn't even look at my phone for a solid 10 minutes after that. My boyfriend, on the other hand, was losing his mind with laughter. He was sending me text after text, trying to comfort me, but I could only send him back panicked one-word responses like help and OMG. I didn't even know where to begin with the apology tour. First, I texted my grandma privately to tell her that I was so sorry, that I wasn't talking about her or anyone in the family. I tried to explain that it was a private message that went to the wrong group, but I'm not sure she fully grasped what had happened. She responded with, "Oh, don't worry, sweetie. Just be sure to be kind to yourself. It's not good to keep things bottled up." Which, while sweet, just made me more embarrassed. Next, I texted my mom, dad, and aunt to clear things up. My mom was surprisingly calm about it, just saying, "I guess it happens to the best of us," and told me not to worry about it. My dad, however, was not nearly as understanding. He sent me a series of text messages asking, "What on earth were you thinking? And that's not something we share in this family, / my name." Which, honestly, made me feel like even more of an idiot. The worst part is, the messages didn't stop there. My aunt, who's notorious for always bringing things up in the most awkward ways, made sure to definitely bring it up during Sunday dinner 2 days later. She asked me in front of everyone, "So, / my name, how's that little outfit working out for you?" My face went redder than I thought possible, and I could feel every pair of eyes on me. Thankfully, my cousin Sarah, who had seen the whole thing unfold, changed the subject quickly, but I swear I could still hear the laughter in my head. It's been a couple of days since it happened, and while the family has mostly moved on, I still feel the residual embarrassment every time I see a notification from any of them. I have learned a few valuable lessons here, though. First, never ever trust your phone when you're sending texts. Second, maybe grandma doesn't need to be in the family group chat anymore. And third, if you make a mistake this bad, you're going to have to live with the consequences for a while. TLDR, accidentally sent a suggestive sext to my entire family group chat, including my grandmother. Family reactions ranged from confused to mortified, and now I can't look at my phone without dying inside. TIFU by getting myself locked in my own car, with my keys, phone, and wallet all inside, during a heat wave, in a parking lot on the hottest day of the year. It started like any other Saturday. I was feeling pretty good because the weather had finally started to warm up after a long, chilly spring, and I was looking forward to meeting my friends at a local brewery. I had a couple of things to do beforehand: pick up some groceries, get gas, and then I could take my time getting to the brewery and just enjoy a relaxing day. I drove to the grocery store, parked, and realized I'd left my shopping list at home. I didn't feel like driving all the way back, so I decided to wing it and just grab whatever I could think of while walking through the aisles. I'm not the best when it comes to grocery shopping, but I figured it wouldn't be too bad. After making a mental list of things I wanted, I filled my cart with random items, got in line to check out, and made my way back to the car. Here's where things started to go wrong. I approached my car and went to open the door, but for some reason, it was locked. Odd, because I always unlock it when I approach, key fob and all. I tapped the unlock button. Nothing. Weird. I pressed it a few more times, thinking maybe the battery was dying or I was just being too impatient. Still nothing. At this point, I thought it was just a malfunctioning key fob, so I reached into my pocket to grab the spare key I always keep with me. But it wasn't there. That's odd. I could have sworn I had it when I left the house. I checked my other pockets. Still nothing. Panic set in. I looked inside the car through the window, and to my horror, there was my phone, sitting on the passenger seat. There was my wallet, resting comfortably in the cup holder. And of course, my keys were on the dashboard. My entire life was locked inside my car, and I was standing there with no way to get to it. It's not like I could just call AAA because, well, my phone was inside the car, and I certainly didn't want to walk all the way to the store to ask to use a phone. I don't know what it is about being locked out of your car that makes you feel like the most helpless person on the planet, but there I was, helpless, surrounded by people who were probably just laughing at me. I figured I could just break the window, but the thought of doing that with everyone watching seemed dramatic. Plus, I'd probably have to pay for that window later, and I wasn't in the mood for an expensive repair. I could have gone into the store to ask to use someone's phone, but that would involve walking away from my car and leaving it unattended. The parking lot was packed, and I could already see people looking at my car like it was some sort of puzzle to figure out. I didn't want anyone to try and break in or mess with it, so I just stood there, looking stupid, feeling more and more defeated as the minutes ticked by. By now, I was starting to sweat. And not just from the heat, it was actually over 90 degrees Fahrenheit, and the sun was beating down hard. I could feel my face turning red and my body starting to overheat. I don't handle heat well, and the fact that I was stuck in this situation only made things worse. I thought about my phone, sitting just a few inches away, taunting me from inside the car, and I almost had a mental breakdown. It occurred to me that I might have left the car unlocked in the first place and the fob had just stopped working. But that didn't make sense either. I checked my pockets again, and the only thing I could find was a receipt from the grocery store, no spare key. I tried every possible way to break into my own car. I knocked on the windows, hoping for someone inside to hear me and let me in. I tried to fish the keys out using a coat hanger, but I'd watched enough YouTube videos to know that was basically just wishful thinking. At one point, I considered asking someone to help me break in. But, I've heard stories about people who try to help only for the situation to end up way worse than before. I didn't need anyone else making this worse. It was also around this time that I realized I didn't have any way to pay for gas either, because my wallet was also locked inside. I couldn't even go get a bottle of water from the store to cool off because, well, my money was in the car. I was completely, utterly stuck. I decided to just sit down in the shade, trying to think of a solution. Every time I thought about calling a locksmith or the dealership, I realized that they would probably ask for ID or proof that the car was mine, which I didn't have because my wallet was inside the car. It felt like I was spiraling into this endless loop of misery, where every attempt to solve the problem just led to another problem. At one point, I considered sitting in my car and waiting for it to cool down, but I could practically feel myself baking inside. I think the heat was starting to mess with my mind because the idea of waiting in the car just sounded like a good option. Finally, after a solid hour of trying everything, I called a locksmith. They told me it would take about 30 minutes for them to get there, and I was willing to take that risk. The sun was starting to dip lower, and I was losing energy, so I tried to distract myself by people watching. Eventually, the locksmith showed up, and after what felt like an eternity of him tinkering with his tools, he managed to pop the door open. I felt like a massive weight was lifted off my shoulders when I heard the car unlock. I think I said thank you at least 5 times, probably more. He just smiled, gave me a nod, and walked off to his next job. I grabbed my keys, wallet, and phone, thankfully all in one piece, and sat in the driver's seat for a few minutes, trying to recover from the entire experience. I don't know why it took me so long to just call someone, but for some reason, I kept thinking I could solve it on my own. That, and the fact that I was too embarrassed to admit I'd managed to get locked out of my own car. I'll admit, it wasn't my finest moment. But after everything, I still made it to the brewery and had a good time with my friends, though I kept the whole car lockout incident to myself. I'm not exactly proud of it, but it's a good reminder. Always check your pockets, and never underestimate the heat or the misery of getting locked out of your car on the worst day possible. Anyway, I'm just thankful I didn't have to break my window. And next time, I'll make sure I keep a spare key with me. Or maybe I'll just make sure I don't leave my keys, phone, and wallet inside a locked car in the first place. Hindsight is a bitch. TIFU by deciding to help my friend with his simple bathroom renovation. It all started last month when my best friend, Tom, bought a new house in the suburbs. He was beyond excited. It was his first home, and after years of renting apartments, he finally had a space to call his own. The house was charming, a little outdated in some areas, but nothing a little elbow grease couldn't fix. One day, he called me over, asking for some help with a small renovation project, his bathroom. Simple, right? He'd already ordered new fixtures, tiles, and had a general idea of what he wanted. He just needed a hand with some of the grunt work, like tiling and plumbing. Now, I'm no expert, but I've helped out with a few DIY projects before. I've watched enough YouTube tutorials to feel somewhat confident about my skills. I figured this would be a fun weekend project where we'd knock it out and enjoy the fruits of our labor afterward. So, naturally, I agreed to help. The bathroom was pretty basic, nothing too complicated. A small shower, toilet, sink, and vanity. The tiles were the main thing Tom wanted to change. He had this idea for a modern, sleek look with white subway tiles on the walls and dark slate for the floor. It sounded like a good idea on paper. Tom was pretty hands-on, so I thought he knew exactly what he was doing. We started early on a Saturday morning, and Tom was full of energy, enthusiastically showing me the plans. We had all the materials, boxes of tiles, mortar, grout, tools, and a big bag of confidence. I'll admit, I was feeling a little cocky myself, thinking, how hard can it be? It's just tiling and plumbing. Tom started by pulling up the old flooring, which was a bit of a chore but manageable. After clearing everything out, we began laying down the new tiles. The first few rows went smoothly, but as we got further along, things started to get messy. The mortar wasn't sticking as well as it should have been, and the tiles were uneven. We double-checked the measurements, but every time we laid a new tile, it seemed to shift out of place. We tried using spacers, but they didn't seem to help much. I wasn't too worried, though. I'd read enough tutorials to know that tiling could be tricky at first, and we could always adjust it later. By midday, we were hungry and decided to take a break. Tom suggested we go grab some pizza, which sounded like a great idea. We took a quick trip to the local pizza joint, chatted about random stuff, and felt pretty good about our progress. When we returned to the house, we were both refreshed and ready to tackle the rest of the project. That's when things went south. We returned to the bathroom to find that the tiles we had laid down earlier had started to shift even more. The mortar had dried too quickly, and we didn't realize that we'd applied it unevenly. Now, instead of a clean, straight line of tiles, we had a crooked mess of gaps and misaligned edges. Tom was panicking, and I could see why. It looked like a disaster. We tried to fix it by removing a few tiles and adjusting them, but they weren't coming up easily. The mortar was too thick in some areas, and the tiles had already started to bond with the surface. As we pried them up, I accidentally cracked one of the tiles, which only made things worse. Tom's eyes widened in horror as he realized we would have to go back to the store and buy more tiles, which would delay the whole process. After what felt like hours of trying and failing to fix the issue, Tom finally gave up on the tiles and suggested we focus on the plumbing. "At least we'll get something done today," he said, trying to stay optimistic. This is where I made my second huge mistake. Tom had bought a new toilet to replace the old one, and we needed to install it. I had seen enough YouTube tutorials to know the basics of toilet installation, so I figured it couldn't be too difficult. Tom had already removed the old toilet, and we were left with the task of installing the new one. We followed the instructions carefully, securing the wax ring and placing the toilet onto the flange. But as soon as we tightened the bolts, we noticed a leak. The toilet wasn't sitting properly, and the connection wasn't sealing tightly. Now, here's where I should have known better. Instead of stopping and rechecking the alignment, I decided to tighten the bolts more. I figured if I just cranked them down harder, it would seal the leak. Tom warned me not to overdo it, but I didn't listen. I gave the bolts one last twist, and that's when I heard a terrifying cracking sound. The base of the toilet had cracked. Tom stood there in stunned silence, and I immediately knew I had made a huge mistake. We'd just ruined a brand new toilet. Not only would we need to replace the toilet again, but the bathroom was now in an even worse state than before. There were broken tiles, a cracked toilet, and the plumbing was still leaking. I felt like a complete idiot. At this point, Tom was furious. Not at me, exactly, but at the situation. He had been so excited about this project, and now it was a total mess. We spent the next few hours trying to clean up the mess, patching up the cracks in the floor and attempting to salvage the tiles. We ended up taking a trip back to the hardware store to buy new tiles, a new toilet, and all the tools we had messed up using. When we finally called it a night, the bathroom was still in disarray. It had taken us the whole weekend, and we had nothing to show for it except frustration, exhaustion, and a mountain of unused materials. We agreed to call in a professional to fix everything. The plumber and Tyler came in the next week, and the job was finished in just 2 days. I learned a valuable lesson that day. Just because you can watch a couple of DIY videos doesn't mean you're ready to tackle a home renovation. Sometimes, it's better to leave the hard stuff to the pros. Tom and I haven't really spoken about the project much since then. It was definitely one of those "I'm never doing this again" experiences. I guess we both learned that some things are better left untouched by amateurs. TIFU by trying to impress my girlfriend with my cooking skills and ending up causing a small kitchen fire. So, a little background, I, 28M, have been dating my girlfriend, 27F, for about a year now. She's always been super supportive and encouraging about everything I do, and lately, I've been feeling a little insecure about my ability to impress her. One of the things I've always admired about her is that she's an excellent cook. We've spent many weekends trying out new recipes, and while I've enjoyed our time together, I've always felt like I'm just a little bit behind her in the kitchen. One night, she mentioned how much she loved homemade lasagna, and that's when I decided I was going to cook her the best lasagna of her life. I figured that if I could pull this off, it would be a game changer. I could prove to her that I was capable of more than just ordering takeout or reheating leftovers. Now, I've never really cooked much beyond basic meals. I can make spaghetti, eggs, a decent stir-fry, basic stuff. But lasagna? That was a whole new level of challenge for me. Still, I was determined. I spent hours looking up recipes, watching YouTube videos, and reading articles about how to make the perfect lasagna. I decided to go all out, homemade sauce, fresh pasta, the works. I was not about to cut corners. I spent the whole day gathering the ingredients: fresh basil, ground beef, ricotta, mozzarella, tomatoes, onions, garlic, eggs, and even some fancy spices I'd never heard of before. I was ready to dive into this project like a pro. I even texted her to say I was making a surprise dinner and told her to be patient. She was obviously excited but didn't know what I was cooking. Perfect, this was going to blow her mind. I started off strong. Chopping the onions, garlic, and basil was easy enough, and I was feeling pretty good. The sauce took longer than I expected, and my apartment started to smell amazing. But here's where things started to get tricky. I underestimated the complexity of the process. I thought I had everything under control, until I realized I needed to bake the lasagna at 375 degrees Fahrenheit for an hour and a half. I set the oven, slid the lasagna in, and cleaned up the kitchen a bit. The smell of the sauce simmering and the cheese melting made me think that this might be my best work yet. Everything was going according to plan. I texted her to say I was almost done, and she replied with a bunch of heart emojis. I was feeling like a 5-star chef at this point. But then, as I sat down to relax for a few minutes and scroll through my phone, I noticed something strange. The kitchen, which had been filled with the delicious smells of my creation, now smelled off. Like something was burning. I immediately shot out of my chair, heart racing. I ran to the oven and opened it, only to be greeted by a plume of smoke and the unmistakable, heart-sinking sight of my lasagna, the edges of it charred black and bubbling. At first, I just stood there, frozen. Smoke was pouring out of the oven, and I could hear the faint crackling of the fire. It didn't register immediately that I had just caused a minor fire in my kitchen. My first instinct was to close the oven door, but I quickly realized that was the worst thing I could do. Panicking, I grabbed a towel and tried to wave it near the smoke detector, hoping to keep it from going off. But no such luck. The blaring noise was enough to make my already panicked brain spiral even further. I should have called the fire department, but for some reason, my first thought was to save the lasagna. Instead of my apartment. I reached for an oven mitt, opened the oven again, and tried to pull the lasagna out. But as soon as I touched the tray, the plastic part of the lasagna pan, the kind that's supposed to be oven safe but apparently wasn't, melted. The tray warped, spilling a ridiculous amount of burning hot sauce onto the oven floor. My kitchen was now officially on fire. In a complete daze, I grabbed the fire extinguisher from the kitchen cupboard. But instead of pulling the safety pin, I just stood there holding it, wondering what the hell I was supposed to do. I managed to pull the pin eventually, but my shaking hands led to me spraying the fire extinguisher directly into the open oven, turning the oven into a white foam-filled mess. The fire didn't exactly go out, but it slowed down, and at that point, I had a full-on meltdown. My kitchen was now covered in thick foam, and the lasagna was a literal charred mess. Now, I could hear my girlfriend texting me, asking when dinner would be ready. I was beyond embarrassed, but I texted her back and said, "I'm so sorry, there's been a small issue. Please don't come over yet." I still wasn't fully aware of the damage I had caused. But at that moment, I couldn't think straight. I immediately opened all the windows, hoping to air out the smoke. The kitchen was covered in a fine layer of foam from the fire extinguisher, and the smell of burnt cheese and sauce was suffocating. I tried cleaning up a bit, but honestly, the whole kitchen was a mess. Everything was either burnt or covered in foam, and I hadn't even started to deal with the oven. It was at this point that I had to admit defeat. I sent her another text, "I need to confess something. I tried to make lasagna, and it kind of ended in a disaster. I might have caused a small fire." She responded with a bunch of laughing emojis followed by, "Are you okay? Please tell me you're not hurt." I assured her I was fine, but the kitchen was not. When she finally arrived, she walked in and stopped in her tracks. She looked around, and after a few seconds of complete silence, she burst into laughter. I knew you couldn't make a lasagna like I do, she said, still laughing. But honestly, I was kind of relieved. She wasn't mad at me, she thought it was hilarious. She gave me a big hug and promised we'd make a new dinner together. The cleanup took hours, and the lasagna, well, it was beyond saving. But the one thing that came out of all this was that my girlfriend thought it was the funniest thing ever. She said that as long as I didn't start any more fires, we were good. In the end, I realized that trying to impress her by cooking wasn't the way to go. I should have just kept it simple and made something I knew I could handle. But honestly, I'll probably never hear the end of this one. At least I've learned my lesson. So yeah, TIFU by trying to cook a fancy dinner and ending up with a fire, foam, and a hilarious memory I'll probably never live down. TIFU by trying to impress my friends with a DIY home improvement project. It all started on a lazy Saturday afternoon. I was hanging out with my group of friends at my place, the usual weekend vibe of snacks, video games, and laughing at dumb memes. At some point, the conversation turned to home improvement projects, and one of my friends mentioned how they had just renovated their kitchen and added a backsplash themselves. It was all the rage on Pinterest, and it got me thinking, hey, I could do that. I could totally DIY something and impress them. Now, let me give you a little background on me. I'm not exactly handy. In fact, I would go so far as to say that I'm the type of person who can barely screw in a light bulb without asking for help. I've never been into power tools or anything involving manual labor. But after seeing how proud my friend was about her new kitchen backsplash, I figured maybe it was time to start small. How hard could it be, right? I decided to go for a bathroom remodel, nothing too extreme, just a little paint and new hardware for the cabinet doors. I figured I'd keep it simple. After all, my friends would definitely be impressed if I could pull it off. They would never expect me to do something like this. So, the next day, I went to the hardware store. Now, I've been in a hardware store before, but I was always the guy who wandered around looking lost, not sure where to find anything or what half the items even were. But this time, I was on a mission. I picked up paint, a couple of new cabinet handles, some sandpaper, and a can of primer. I felt confident. I even grabbed a couple of YouTube tutorials on bathroom cabinet refinishing for guidance. I got home and immediately started. I cleared out the bathroom, set up my supplies, and put on an old t-shirt that I didn't care about getting dirty. First, I started with the sanding. I knew I needed to smooth the surface of the cabinets before I could paint them. It sounded straightforward enough. But after about 10 minutes of sanding, I realized I was getting nowhere fast. It was like I was sanding a rock with a toothpick. The cabinet surface was smooth, but it wasn't smooth enough. I had to keep at it, my arm growing more sore by the minute, but I soldiered on. When the sanding was finally done, I moved on to the primer. Now, this is where things started to get out of hand. I had never used primer before. The YouTube tutorials had made it look so easy, just roll it on, smooth it out, and let it dry. Simple, right? I began to apply it, and the first coat went on okay. But the second coat? That's when things got a little messy. As I applied the second coat of primer, I noticed that the paint roller wasn't working as smoothly as it should have. It was leaving streaks, and it was starting to get clumpy. I figured I could just go over it with a brush, but then I realized I had no idea how to properly use a brush for painting cabinets. The brush strokes left marks, and the paint was starting to look like something a toddler had done. At this point, I was panicking a little. I had no backup plan, no way out. I kept painting anyway, telling myself that it would look better once the paint dried. It didn't. I left it to dry overnight, hoping that the next morning would bring a miracle. When I came back the next day, I found that the primer had dried into a weird, uneven texture. The streaks were more pronounced, and I was sure the entire bathroom would now have this odd, patchy texture. At this point, I wanted to quit. I really did. But I couldn't. The idea of telling my friends I'd failed at a simple DIY project wasn't an option. they'd never let me live it down. So I proceeded to the next step, painting. I picked out a nice soft white paint, thinking it would give the bathroom a fresh, clean look. I thought if I could just cover up the primer disaster, everything would be fine. The first coat went on, and it actually looked okay. Not great, but it wasn't the worst thing I had ever seen. I let it dry, then applied the second coat. That's when disaster struck. While I was painting, I realized that the paint wasn't adhering evenly. In some places, it was thick and glossy, while in others, it was thin and patchy. I started brushing over the spots where the paint seemed lighter, but I accidentally overworked the areas that were already painted. This caused streaks that looked even worse. At that moment, I decided to just finish the job. I put on the third coat, hoping it would magically fix everything. After the third coat dried, it was clear that I had created something akin to an abstract art piece rather than a bathroom upgrade. The walls were streaky, the cabinets were uneven, and the whole thing looked like it had been through a war. But the worst part? I had to show my friends. I had already been talking about how great the project would turn out, how they'd be amazed by my handiwork. I couldn't just back out now. A week later, my friends came over, and I nervously showed them the bathroom. They entered, looked around, and for a second, there was an awkward silence. Finally, one of my friends tried to compliment it. "Wow, you really went for it, huh?" she said, her voice shaky, probably trying to find something nice to say. "It's unique?" The others nodded, but no one seemed overly enthusiastic. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Then one friend, who I'm pretty sure could see I was on the verge of a breakdown, said, "Well, at least you tried. That's what counts." They were trying to be supportive, but they could barely hold it together. We all started laughing, and I had to admit defeat. I couldn't keep pretending that this was a success. I wasn't cut out for DIY, and I should have stuck to what I knew best, letting professionals handle things. In the end, I ended up calling in a professional to redo everything. The bathroom looks great now, but the whole experience was a huge lesson in humility. DIY is not for everyone, and sometimes, it's okay to admit that you're better off leaving it to the experts. So, if you ever see a Pinterest post or YouTube tutorial about bathroom renovations, just remember, it's not as easy as it looks. And if you're like me, it's probably best to stick to things you know you can handle, like ordering pizza and choosing the best Netflix shows. TLDR, tried to impress my friends with a DIY bathroom remodel. Ended up with an uneven, streaky disaster that I had to call professionals to fix. Lesson learned, stick to what I know. So, this happened last weekend, and it's honestly been one of the most embarrassing things I've done in a while. I've been putting off telling anyone because I just want to bury this memory deep, but my friends won't let me forget. And now, I guess, it's time to share this with strangers on the internet so I can get some perspective, or maybe just laugh at my own stupidity. To start, I've been dating this amazing girl, let's call her Sarah, for about 6 months now. Things were going great, nothing too crazy, but we were both really happy. We hadn't reached the meeting each other's parents stage yet, but it was definitely on the horizon. So, naturally, when Sarah invited me to her parents' place for dinner, I was both excited and nervous. I mean, I don't know if I was just overthinking it, but the idea of meeting the people who raised her felt like a big deal. I wanted to make a good impression, you know? Now, I should clarify something here. I am not the best cook. Actually, I'm pretty terrible. Like, I can barely cook pasta without burning it. But I thought, hey, this is a great opportunity to show Sarah's parents that I'm a responsible, thoughtful guy, right? So, I decided I was going to bring dessert. I had this grand idea that I would bake a homemade cheesecake. Because, you know, what's better than making something from scratch, right? The plan was to make a no-bake cheesecake, which seemed simple enough. I watched a YouTube tutorial to make sure I knew what I was doing, and I went to the store to buy all the ingredients. As I walked through the aisles, I felt more and more confident, this is going to be awesome. I've got this. Well, I didn't have it. Not at all. First, I grabbed all the wrong ingredients. Instead of regular graham crackers for the crust, I accidentally bought some weird gluten-free, super organic version of graham crackers that looked like they'd been ground by a hippie on a mountaintop. I didn't even realize this until I was halfway through crushing them with a rolling pin and noticed they weren't sticking together the way they should. They were falling apart like sand. At that point, I should have just given up. But I didn't. I kept going, thinking, I can make it work. It'll be fine. Next, I was supposed to use regular cream cheese, but I grabbed a weird, low-fat version that was definitely not the right consistency. I didn't even think to check it. The tutorial I followed mentioned using heavy cream, but I mistakenly bought half and half, because I was too distracted by my own excitement to pay attention. I mixed everything up anyway, and the batter looked okay, I guess. It wasn't as smooth as I thought it should be, but I figured it'd set once it chilled in the fridge. Still, I had no idea what I was doing. After a few hours of chilling, I took the cheesecake out of the fridge, and I was already running late, so I panicked. The crust was crumbling, the filling was too thin, and the whole thing was leaning to one side, like it had started to melt in the fridge. At this point, I was seriously considering just running to the store and buying a pre-made dessert, but I thought, no. I can't back out now. I'm committed. Sarah will appreciate the effort. So, I slapped a sad, lopsided cheesecake into the car and drove over to Sarah's house. The entire time, I kept praying that somehow, some miracle would occur, and this cheesecake would look halfway decent when I got there. When I arrived, I was met by Sarah's parents, who were very kind but also gave me that polite but worried look you get when you show up to someone's house with something that looks like it's been through a tornado. Hey. So, I made a cheesecake, I said with way more enthusiasm than the situation deserved. Sarah's mom smiled, but her face was full of concern. Oh, how sweet of you. You didn't have to bring dessert, but we'll try it. I set the cheesecake on the table, and my heart sank. The thing was a disaster. It looked like a cheesecake had been attacked by a bear, and all that was left was a sad heap of whipped cream, cream cheese, and crushed up organic graham crackers. But I couldn't just back out now. It was already there. The time had come. We sat down to eat, and I noticed that Sarah's dad, who was a total foodie and kind of a culinary snob, was eyeing the cheesecake suspiciously. It wasn't the kind of thing you'd want to serve at a dinner party, but I thought, hey, they can't expect gourmet from me. It's the thought that counts. Sarah's mom cut a slice and handed it to me. I took a bite and immediately regretted it. The taste was off. The filling was too thin and tasted a little tangy in a way I couldn't explain, and the crust had no structure, it was more like crumbs stuck together with sadness. But I smiled and said, it's an interesting take on cheesecake. Sarah's dad took a bite, and I could see his face contort. It wasn't pleasant. He cleared his throat. This is, different. He gave a tight smile, clearly trying not to offend me, but it was too obvious. I think he was trying to decide if it was bad enough to call 911. Then Sarah, who I could tell was trying to hold in her laughter, nudged me and whispered, "Babe, what did you do to it?" I whispered back, "I don't know, but this is awful. I think I'm going to die of embarrassment." As the night went on, Sarah's parents politely ate the cheesecake, though I could tell they were struggling to hide their discomfort. There were awkward silences, and I could feel the pressure building. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Sarah's dad put his fork down and said, "Well, that was unique. Not quite like any cheesecake I've ever had." I wanted to sink into the floor and never come out. But, somehow, Sarah's mom was nice enough to say, "Well, it was a nice gesture, sweetie. We appreciate the effort." I tried to salvage the evening by joking around, but every time I looked at Sarah, I could see that her face was fighting off a grin. She pulled me aside after dinner and, to her credit, didn't immediately laugh. But as soon as we were alone, she said, "Babe, that was something else." The next morning, Sarah texted me a photo of the cheesecake sitting in the trash, with the caption, "It's for the best." We both laughed, but I've been giving her grief ever since about it. It's one of those moments where you want to pretend it never happened, but somehow, it's going to haunt me forever. So, yeah, I totally messed up. Don't try to impress your girlfriend's parents with something you've never made before. It's a lesson I'll never forget. TIFU by accidentally setting my roommate's cat on fire and almost burning down the apartment. It started like any other Thursday morning. My roommate, Matt, had already left for work, and I was getting ready to tackle a bunch of freelance writing assignments. I've never been a morning person, so I was moving sluggishly, trying to make coffee while simultaneously scrolling through my phone and checking emails. I live in a tiny one-bedroom apartment in the city, and as usual, the place was a mess. Matt's cat, George, was lounging on the couch, completely oblivious to my impending catastrophe. Now, to be fair, I wasn't a huge fan of George. He was a very assertive cat. He'd frequently jump up on the counter while I was cooking, knock things over just for the fun of it, and stare at me as though he was judging my life choices. He wasn't a bad cat, just incredibly annoying. But Matt loved him to pieces, so I tolerated him. So, I'm standing in the kitchen, drinking my coffee, when I hear a familiar sound, George's little paw pads padding across the floor toward me. I didn't think much of it at first. I figured he was going to climb up on the counter like usual, but this time, instead of going for the counter, he decided to jump up onto the stove. Now, our stove is one of those old, gas-powered models, and I have to admit, I don't clean it as often as I should. I know, bad habit, but I mostly use the microwave and the toaster oven. The stove, however, was in desperate need of a good scrub. There was a little grease residue around the burners, but nothing that would cause a major issue, or so I thought. As soon as I saw George jump up onto the stove, I instinctively shooed him away. "No, George," I said, waving my arms in that way that's supposed to make a cat listen. But George, being George, was having none of it. He continued to walk across the stove, brushing past the knobs. Without realizing it, he nudged the knob of one of the burners, and suddenly, poof, the burner flared up with a huge, blue flame, just as George's tail brushed right by it. Everything happened so fast that it was like I was in some kind of nightmare where nothing made sense. One moment, I was holding my coffee cup and watching George nonchalantly stroll across the stove, and the next, I was seeing his tail catch fire in the blink of an eye. George, in his typical cat fashion, didn't seem to immediately notice that his tail was on fire. Instead, he swished it around a bit, probably thinking, "Oh, this is a strange feeling." By the time I processed what was happening, his tail was already fully engulfed in flames, and he was still casually walking in circles, oblivious to the impending doom. I dropped my coffee cup and screamed, "And oh, George," as I rushed toward him. In my panic, I grabbed the nearest thing, which, unfortunately, was the dish towel I had been using to dry the dishes. I tried to swat the flames off his tail with the towel, but in my panic, I only made it worse. Now, here's where I really screwed up. In my attempt to put out the flames, I flung the towel across the kitchen, where it landed on the counter and immediately caught fire. Suddenly, there were flames everywhere. The cat was still running around, my heart was pounding in my chest, and I was trying to juggle between putting out the fire on the cat's tail and the one on the towel. In a moment of sheer stupidity, I yanked the towel off the counter and tossed it into the sink, except I didn't turn the sink on first. So, now I had a burning towel in the sink, a burning cat in the apartment, and an entire kitchen that was beginning to look like a scene from a disaster movie. At this point, I'm completely losing my mind, just running around in circles, trying to put out fires while George, in classic feline fashion, seems to think it's all some sort of weird game. He's zooming around the apartment, his tail on fire, like some sort of hellish fireworks display. I finally grab the fire extinguisher from under the sink, but I'm so shaken that I can't even figure out how to pull the pin. I'm standing there, staring at the fire extinguisher, frozen in panic, when suddenly I hear the door open. Matt had come home early from work, no doubt because he could sense that disaster was on the horizon. He took one look at me, wide-eyed, hair disheveled, holding a fire extinguisher like it was some kind of weapon, and then glanced at the kitchen, where flames were still licking the edges of the counter and George was darting around like an absolute maniac. "Jesus Christ," he yelled, rushing past me and grabbing the fire extinguisher out of my hands. "What the hell happened?" "George, his tail caught fire," I sputtered, pointing at the now singed cat, who was sitting on the couch, still looking utterly unfazed by the chaos around him. Matt didn't waste time asking questions. He immediately sprayed the fire extinguisher at the kitchen, dousing the flames and managing to put out the fire on the towel and the counter. He then rushed over to George, who by now had finally realized something was wrong, as his tail was thoroughly charred. "George, you stupid cat," Matt muttered, kneeling down to check the damage. "Are you okay?" To my shock, George seemed completely fine. He wasn't acting like a traumatized, burned creature, but more like someone who had just experienced a mild inconvenience. He didn't even flinch when Matt checked his tail. As it turned out, his fur had burned off in some spots, but the skin underneath seemed intact. It was honestly impressive how resilient cats were. We managed to get the fire under control, but the apartment was a mess. There were burnt patches on the counter, soot everywhere, and I'm pretty sure the smoke detector was still wailing in the background. My heart was still racing, and I had no idea how I was going to explain this to Matt. "Look," I said sheepishly, "I'm really sorry. I wasn't trying to set your cat on fire." Matt gave me a long, exasperated look. "I know you weren't. But, seriously, you need to stop trying to be a hero. First, you're burning my kitchen down, and then you almost killed George. You can't just throw towels around in a panic. That's how apartments burn down." I had no argument. He was right. I had completely lost it in the moment and made everything worse. Fortunately, Matt was surprisingly understanding, probably because he knew I was a mess in moments of stress. He ended up taking George to the vet for a quick checkup, and George, thankfully, was perfectly fine, just a little singed. The vet gave him a clean bill of health, and Matt insisted on buying him a new collar as a treat for his traumatic experience. As for me, I spent the next few hours cleaning up the mess I made, trying to salvage what little dignity I had left. I've learned a valuable lesson: don't let a cat near a gas stove, and don't panic when you're holding a fire extinguisher. Also, don't be the guy who almost burns down his apartment because of a cat's tail. But hey, at least George is a survivor, and Matt and I can laugh about it now. Sort of. Every time I see George, I can't help but think of his little flaming tail, and I'm pretty sure Matt hasn't let me forget it since. Thank you for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss new videos. Also, leave a comment, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Your support and engagement mean a lot to me. See you in the next video.